Russia has once again rejected Western accusations that it is planning to invade neighboring Ukraine. Head of Russia's foreign intelligence agency says he needs to reassure everyone that nothing like this is going to happen. Sergei Narishkin said suggestion that Moscow may be poised to launch an attack is malicious U.S. propaganda. The remarks came a day after the U.S. State Department's top diplomat for European affairs said all options are on the table in how to respond to Russia's troop buildup along its border with Ukraine. Karen Donfried also said NATO will decide on the next move after consultations next week. U.S. and its Western allies have accused Moscow of preparing an invasion plan. Russia, however, says it is free to move its soldiers throughout its territory and has instead condemned NATO for its provocative acts. Joining us now for the program is Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol, and Robert Fantina, author and journalist, joining us from Kitchener, Ontario. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program here. I guess we'll start there in Bristol with you, Tony. Hope you're safe and doing well. Your initial thoughts on the story?
Well, interesting. Sergei Narishkin from the Foreign Intelligence Service. It's interesting to see the way that the Russians... They realise that this is nonsense that the West is talking about a Russian invasion. And shall I tell you how we know that in the West? People who are switched on. That's because the Western media has been coming up with this story ever since about 1948, 1949. So we're talking now about something like 70 years. We've been being told there's a threat from Russia. The Russia's about to invade. Well, of course, the total opposite is what's taken place. And the NATO forces have actually been moving closer and closer to the borders of Russia and threatening Russia. So the opposite has been taking place as to what they're now saying. Now, of course, when there are potential, maybe Russian intelligence gets information that the West is going to try some sort of a provocation on the border, it would make sense for them to move their troops. But the idea that the Russians are about to invade us, I'm afraid, these people who are saying this are living in fairyland. This is not going to happen. I can categorically say there will be no invasion from Russia. And what may happen, though, is that we may see some sort of provocation going on from and by the West. The Russians are, I think, very... a measured nation. It's an Orthodox nation, which actually makes it different to the European Catholic and Protestant type attitudes, and I think they're very reliable, basically. We've seen the West threatening Russia, and it is a form of Russophobia, actually. It's a kind of mental illness there seems to be in the West for hundreds of years. We're talking about Napoleon. We're talking about, the attack by Adolf Hitler against the Russians. The West have always actually been the aggressors, and the Russians have generally been on the defensive. And since the end of communism and the dropping of, Stalinism, this kind of thing, Leninism and Bolshevism, the Russians have become very, very measured and probably the most mature of all of the permanent members of the Security Council. So this is just absolute nonsense. And I can tell you why I believe on the intelligence side, why the West at the moment particularly fears and dislikes Russia. It's because in London in the 1970s, 1980s and early 90s, the Russian KGB were collecting lots of information about the crimes, high crimes and misdemeanors, not least of which is child sexual abuse of senior figures in the British establishment. And I think that's one of the main reasons actually why the British establishment actually fears the Russians and is projecting onto them much of this fear, and they would like the information that the Russians have never to have been because this could be used in the future against them. And I think they're actually afraid of the truth, not just afraid of Russia.
Thank you, Tony. And Robert, I'd like to welcome you to the program. Hope you're doing well out there in Kitchener, Ontario. Now, Robert, it's funny because you see NATO and its the buildup getting closer and closer to Russia's borders, multiple countries. You see them flocking into the Black Sea like it's their backyard, yet they're pointing the finger at Russia. It's Moscow that's getting ready to invade and not them.
Yes, this is typical U.S. propaganda. The U.S. is always pointing the finger at someone else before it's ready to invade. The United States is positioning its troops in nearly 1,000 foreign military bases on borders of many countries, almost surrounding Iran, as a matter of fact. So this new accusation is just the typical U.S. policy of having some enemy, something to take away from the attention of the problems of the United States. We have to remember President Biden his poll numbers are very low. There's talk that the Republicans will take control of the House and Senate next year. And a war is something that, for whatever reason, U.S. citizenry always rallies around. So if the United States can either threaten a war or actually have one, that is politically beneficial for the party in power. Now, as Moscow's foreign intelligence chief mentioned, Russia has the right to position its troops anywhere it wants to within its own country. The United States positions its troops anywhere it wants to within the world. This is a criminal activity, but to accuse Moscow of planning an invasion of the Ukraine because it has moved troops somewhere near the border, when the United States has troops near the borders of countless countries around the world, is simply typical U.S. hypocrisy. We see it continually in U.S. foreign policy.
I guess, Tony, at this point we have to ask ourselves the question, then in the case, if we accept both of your narratives, why is it that the U.S. and its Western allies at this point in time need the world to believe that Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine?
Well, it's a really good question, because it is quite difficult to fathom this stuff. This is how this sort of propaganda succeeds, because many of the viewers and listeners here in the West will be viewing this kind of thing uncritically, because the journalists are simply not doing their job and holding these spokespeople's feet to the fire. They're simply not doing that. They just accept this stuff verbatim. It's most people will think, well, why on earth would they lie? The fact of the matter is there are very, very important negotiations going on, as you know, in Vienna over the re-signing of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. And one of the major superpowers who wants that deal to be re-signed is the Russians. And so it seems to me the sort of reason why this kind of thing might come out now is simply to deflect negative, basically negative publicity, an attempt to put negative publicity onto the Russians in that sphere. But there are lots of ways in which, the West doesn't like Russia, fears Russia, largely because they have a knowledge of the Russian armaments industry, which is far, far less corrupt than the West's. Actually, if it came to a fight, the rubbish that has been being sold to the United States government by many of these US and British arms firms wouldn't stand up to the Russians. So it's another reason why they fear them. But I think at the moment, these international discussions about whether Biden should keep his promise before the election to re-sign the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, I think they are just trying to simply deflect away from the complete failure of US democracy to do its job, with everyone voting, not just on that issue, but on many issues, for Joe Biden to be a responsible international player. What we're now seeing is that he's about to back out. And so they're looking for someone else to blame. In fact, I think this is pretty much psychopathological behavior by people. They're expressing their own guilt by blaming others. And I think that's it's a dangerous sort of situation that we're in now, with a major superpower like the United States behaving in this unhinged fashion.
Thank you, Tony. And Robert, I'm going to allow you to get the last word in. And another funny thing is that we know the U.S. has been really after getting Europeans not to accept the completion of the Nord Stream 2 gas line, the pipeline project that's going into Germany, that's going to pump Russian resources into Germany for energy. And we just saw the Germans yesterday warning the Russians there will be severe consequences if they invade Ukraine. So it's almost laughable how this stuff is built up to meet political objectives.
Yes, it is, because as has been said, as the Moscow government spokespeople said, there's no plan to invade the Ukraine. So Germany saying that there will be repercussions if Moscow does is just ridiculous. Moscow has no intention of doing this. why is the German government saying this? Well, they're simply kowtowing to what the United States wants. The United States has set this narrative, and its European allies who followed it in the violation of the JCPOA are also following the United States in this nonsensical statement about Russia and the Ukraine. So it's more of the same. It's U.S. posturing for a position that it may not believe is real, but is doing it to either deflect from some other issues, some internal issues in the United States that it will, or from international issues that it's failing at and wants to, again, draw attention away from.
It's always the smoke, all the smoke. Thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you both on. Tony,
this is more
go ahead, Tony.
For a
go
comedy
ahead.
program than for international diplomacy. It's a comic statement that that Biden has made that the Russians are now responding to.
All right, Tony, you want to say that one more time? I didn't get the last part of what you said.
I'm just saying that this is the statement from the United States is really only fit for a comedy program, a satire program, and I think that the Russians have just been very cool and calm to respond in the way they have. But I bet you back in Moscow they are laughing at this.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both for joining us once again. Tony Gosling joining us there out of Bristol, and Robert Fantina, author and journalist, joining us from Kitchener, Ontario. And viewers, that's a wrap for this segment of your Press TV's News Review program. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.